Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you tried, it was never enough? Like you were invisible, constantly living in someone else's shadow? You're not alone. Jessica Harper spent her entire life fighting to be seen, not by strangers, but by the people who were supposed to love her the most, her family. In a world where your worth seems to be measured by the love others give, what happens when you stop waiting for them to see you? What if you could learn to value yourself, even when no one else does? Stick with me because today's story is about a woman who learned to stand tall, not because others told her she could, but because she finally believed it herself. Jessica Harper was born on a bright spring morning in Oregon, the kind of morning that promises new beginnings. She shared this day with her twin sister, Caroline, just 4 minutes apart. To most people, that's a laughable difference, a detail that might even go unnoticed. But to Jessica's parents, those 4 minutes felt like a lifetime. Caroline, the little angel, was always the chosen one. Her world was full of sparkles and praise, custom bikes, new dresses, a constant stream of admiration. And Jessica? Well, Jessica learned early on to blend into the background. She got hand-me-downs, a faded bike with broken brakes, and an old ballet costume that no one seemed to care about. It wasn't that her parents didn't love her. It was just that they loved Caroline more. As a child, Jessica didn't understand why her efforts were never enough. She was smart, hardworking, and resilient, yet she never seemed to get the recognition she deserved. Caroline fell off a slide once, just a scrape on her knee, and her mom cried for hours, telling anyone who would listen. Jessica fell out of a tree, bloodied and bruised, and her dad just said, "Let her learn to deal with it." This wasn't just a childhood story. It was the foundation of Jessica's life. The message was clear. Caroline was the priority. Jessica was just the one who could handle herself. But somewhere deep inside, Jessica made a decision. She would no longer wait for anyone to see her. She would make them see, not through words but through her actions. And as she grew, she learned the power of silence, of doing the hard work even when no one was watching. She wasn't doing it for them anymore. She was doing it for herself. And so the story begins. A journey of self-discovery, of proving not just to others, but to herself, that she was worth more than the scraps left behind. This is Jessica's story. A story about how the lack of love can become the very fuel that drives you to rise above it all. Stay with me. We're just getting started. Have you ever felt like you were giving everything but it was never enough? Like no matter how hard you tried, you just couldn't get the recognition or love you deserved? You're not alone. Jessica Harper, a woman with dreams bigger than the world around her, spent most of her life feeling like she was invisible. Imagine growing up in a family where your sibling is always the golden child, the one who gets all the attention, all the praise, and all the love. Jessica's twin sister, Caroline, was the one everyone focused on. From the moment they were born, their parents showered Caroline with admiration, while Jessica was left to quietly watch from the sidelines. This wasn't just about material things like the sparkly dresses or fancy gifts. It was the constant feeling of being overlooked, the lack of hugs, the absence of attention, and the sense that no matter what she did, it was never enough to make her parents proud. For Jessica, it wasn't about the stuff. It was about being seen, being recognized, being loved just as much as Caroline. But here's the thing that Jessica didn't know back then. The way her family treated her didn't define her worth. We all go through moments when we feel like we're just one step away from being invisible. But it's in those moments that we often learn the most about who we truly are. Jessica's journey didn't start with a grand moment of recognition. It started in the quiet moments of realizing that maybe, just maybe, she didn't need anyone else's approval to know her worth. And that's the lesson we'll take with us today. Your value doesn't depend on the attention you get from others. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is believe in yourself, even when no one else does. Let's dive deeper into Jessica's story and see how this realization began to shape the woman she would become. Imagine being just a child, full of dreams and hopes, and yet feeling like you're constantly falling short. For Jessica, this was her reality from a very young age. Her childhood wasn't filled with the same warmth and comfort many kids experience. Instead, it was marked by a feeling of never measuring up. Jessica and Caroline were twins, born just 4 minutes apart. To most people, those 4 minutes wouldn't mean much, but to their parents, they seemed to mark the line between being the favorite and being, well, just Jessica. From the moment they were born, it was clear. Caroline was the one who got the spotlight. She was the angel, the child who could do no wrong. And Jessica, she was always in the background, never quite seen for who she truly was. Let me give you an example. When they were 6, Jessica and Caroline joined ballet class. Caroline got a custom-made sparkling white dress, the kind that made her feel like she was a star. Jessica, on the other hand, wore last year's faded costume, a little too small and fraying at the edges. It wasn't just about the dress. It was the fact that no one seemed to notice Jessica's efforts, no one acknowledged her, while Caroline was constantly praised. And this didn't just happen once. It was a pattern. At home, when something went wrong, Caroline's every scrape and bruise seemed like a tragedy. One day, she fell off the backyard slide, a small scrape on her knee, and their mother rushed out, sobbing as if it were the end of the world. But when Jessica fell off the tallest apple tree in their yard and ended up with dirt all over her face, bleeding from her knees, her dad simply said, "She's tough. Let her learn how to get through it." Jessica didn't get the hugs, the comfort, the attention. She was expected to be strong enough to handle the pain, strong enough to stay quiet, and strong enough to fade into the background. For years, she believed that maybe she was just too sensitive, that maybe she was imagining things. But deep down, Jessica knew there was a difference. The love she got, if it could even be called love, was always secondhand, always overshadowed by Caroline's brilliance. This kind of comparison is something many of us have experienced, even if not in exactly the same way. Maybe it was a sibling, a classmate, or even a friend who seemed to get all the praise while you were left behind. The feeling of being overlooked can feel like it's slowly eating away at your sense of self-worth. But here's the lesson. Being constantly compared doesn't have to define you. It doesn't mean you're any less capable, any less valuable. It just means that sometimes the people around us are too blind to see our true potential. And when we realize that, it can become the fuel we need to start believing in ourselves. So, let's move forward with Jessica's story and see how these early years of feeling invisible became the driving force for her transformation. As Jessica grew older, she began to realize something important. Her strength wasn't about how loudly she could shout for attention or how hard she could fight for recognition. It was about finding her voice in the quiet moments, learning that silence could be a form of power. For years, Jessica had desperately tried to be seen, to prove that she was just as worthy of love and recognition as Caroline. But the more she tried, the more she felt invisible. It was as if the harder she worked, the more distant her parents became. She began to understand that the applause and the hugs weren't coming, and maybe they never would. So she started to change her approach. Instead of demanding attention, she started focusing on what she could control: her own growth. She poured herself into her studies, finding comfort in the pages of books and the quiet, steady rhythm of learning. Writing became her escape, her way of expressing emotions she couldn't voice aloud. Jessica wasn't just writing stories. She was writing herself into existence, one word at a time. One day, in her 4th grade classroom, Jessica's essay on summer vacation was chosen to be read in front of the entire school. It was the first time she felt seen by anyone other than her teachers. But when she looked to the crowd, she saw Caroline sitting with their parents, and noticed that their attention was elsewhere, on Caroline's new dress, not on her sister's triumph. Jessica didn't let this moment of disappointment crush her. Instead, it taught her an invaluable lesson. Real strength comes from within, not from the applause of others. This realization wasn't immediate. It was a quiet shift in her mindset. Jessica understood that the world may never validate her, but it didn't matter anymore. She was learning to validate herself. As Jessica continued to grow, the silence from her family only grew louder. She had long since stopped seeking their validation, and yet, there was a part of her that still hoped deep down that maybe, just maybe, her parents would one day see her for the person she had become. But with every achievement, every victory, came a bitter realization. No matter how much she did, they remained indifferent. Jessica had worked hard throughout high school, dedicating herself to her studies and extracurricular activities. She was the student who never took shortcuts, the one who stayed up late studying and sacrificed weekends to build a better future. When she scored a perfect mark on Oregon State Language Arts exam, it was a proud moment, one that deserved recognition. Yet, when she walked through the door that night, holding her certificate with the hope of receiving a simple word of praise, her father barely looked up from the TV. "You're a smart kid," he said, with the same indifferent tone he'd always used. There was no celebration, no congratulations. Just another moment where Jessica's worth seemed to slip through the cracks. This wasn't the first time. Every time Jessica earned something she was proud of, it felt as though her parents were always preoccupied with Caroline's achievements, no matter how small. And for Jessica, that quiet comparison stung more than any loud remark could. It wasn't just about being overlooked. It was about being constantly told, without words, that she wasn't important enough to celebrate. But here's where Jessica began to change. Instead of letting this lack of validation define her, she learned to seek approval from the one place that mattered most: herself. Real self-validation wasn't about waiting for someone else to acknowledge your worth. It was about recognizing your own value, even when the world doesn't. She started to focus on her own journey, carving a path that was entirely hers. She didn't need her parents' approval to know that she was capable. In fact, she began to thrive because she no longer depended on them to validate her efforts. This shift in mindset was empowering. It gave her the freedom to pursue what she wanted without the weight of others' expectations. Jessica's journey toward self-validation didn't stop when she left high school. In fact, it only became more challenging as she entered college. For the first time, she would be away from her parents' direct influence. But that didn't mean the old patterns of comparison had vanished. If anything, they were more pronounced than ever. When Jessica and Caroline both decided to major in accounting at Columbia State University, Jessica hoped it might be a fresh start, a place where she could finally shine without the shadow of her sister looming over her. But things didn't play out quite the way she imagined. Caroline, as always, was the one who seemed to have it all. The new laptop, the top-of-the-line textbooks, the family-funded dorm room. Meanwhile, Jessica had to rely on her scholarship, work-study jobs, and the long hours she spent cleaning classrooms and tutoring other students to make ends meet. Her room was in the basement, small and cold, with peeling paint on the walls. But she didn't complain. She was used to fighting for what she wanted. In the quiet moments when Jessica was hunched over her desk late at night, writing papers and solving equations, she couldn't help but compare herself to Caroline. Her sister seemed to glide through life effortlessly, spending her weekends at parties and posting pictures of fancy dinners. Caroline's life looked so easy, so carefree, while Jessica felt like she was drowning in work and responsibilities. Yet, despite all the external comforts that Caroline had, Jessica knew she had something her sister didn't: grit. But that didn't stop the feelings of resentment from creeping in. Jessica overheard a conversation one day, as she was mopping the third floor of the business building, that only deepened the divide. Caroline was laughing with a classmate in the hallway, bragging about the party she had gone to the night before. "Oh, Jessica's probably buried in her books somewhere. Maybe cleaning classrooms again," Caroline said with a teasing tone. Jessica didn't respond. She just tightened her grip on the mop and kept going. The sting of her sister's words was sharp, but it didn't break her. It simply reminded her of the long road she had ahead. Pause for a moment, let the emotion of the story sink in. How do you feel right now? Can you relate to Jessica's struggle, her drive to prove herself even when no one seemed to care? Have you ever fought for validation, only to realize that the greatest approval you can get is from yourself? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know how Jessica's journey resonates with you. Do you see a part of yourself in her story? Or maybe you've experienced something similar in your own life. Let's talk about it. Your story matters too. Let the audience reflect as the story continues. After years of striving, struggling, and being overlooked, Jessica finally reached a moment that would change everything. She had stopped waiting for validation from her family or anyone else, and instead, she focused on what mattered most, proving to herself that she was capable of achieving greatness. One day, in the midst of juggling her multiple jobs and studying late into the night, Jessica's hard work started to pay off in ways she hadn't expected. During one of her late-night study sessions in the library, she overheard a conversation between two professors. They were talking about a prestigious internship program at a top accounting firm, one that very few students were selected for. One of the professors casually mentioned that the firm was looking for a few top candidates who showed promise, and that a few students had already caught their eye. Something clicked inside of Jessica. She didn't wait for someone to hand her an opportunity. She seized it herself. She worked tirelessly on her resume, adjusted her cover letter until every word felt just right, and submitted her application with determination. She wasn't doing this for anyone but herself. She had already decided she was worthy of this chance, regardless of whether anyone recognized it. Weeks later, she received an email that made her heart race. She had been selected for the internship. It wasn't just the internship that filled her with pride, though. It was the realization that she had earned it on her own terms. She had worked through the sleepless nights, the long hours, and the loneliness of feeling invisible. Now she was being recognized for her hard work and dedication, not because someone else decided she deserved it, but because she had proven to herself that she could do it. The day Jessica had been waiting for had finally arrived. She was invited to a prestigious award ceremony in Chicago, where she would receive recognition for her academic achievements and hard work. It was a moment that, in some ways, should have been shared with her family, the very people who had overlooked her for so long. And yet, Jessica knew this was her moment, earned through her own perseverance, and she didn't need them to validate it. The ceremony was everything Jessica had imagined: grand, elegant, and filled with successful individuals. As she sat in the large hall, surrounded by families taking pictures and celebrating their children's accomplishments, she couldn't help but notice the contrast between them and her own reality. Her family wasn't there. It didn't sting as much as it used to. In fact, by this point, Jessica had accepted that her family's absence didn't diminish her achievement. It highlighted just how far she had come without their support. She wasn't waiting for their applause anymore, and as she walked onto the stage to accept her award, she realized something important. She had made it on her own. The crowd clapped, and as she stood there accepting her award, she couldn't help but notice her parents' empty seats. It didn't upset her like it once would have. Instead, it brought her peace. She had arrived at this moment on her own terms. For so long, she had wanted them to be proud of her, to see her for who she truly was. But now, standing there, she realized that it wasn't their approval that mattered anymore. What mattered was that she finally saw herself for who she had always been: a determined, capable woman who didn't need anyone's permission to succeed. After the ceremony in Chicago, Jessica returned to her hotel room alone. The evening was chilly, and the hum of the city below only added to the stillness she felt inside. As much as she had imagined this moment, standing on stage receiving the award, she couldn't deny the emptiness of not having her family there to share it with. But she had come to terms with it. She had made it on her own. And that was enough. But then, just as she was packing her things to head back to school, her phone rang. It was Caroline. "Where are you?" Caroline asked softly, her voice unlike the confident, sometimes brash tone Jessica had grown used to. "I was thinking, maybe I could come see you for a few minutes." Jessica hesitated for a moment. Part of her wanted to say no. She was tired of the endless comparisons, tired of being the one who always had to step aside. But another part of her, the part that still remembered the little girl who only wanted to be seen, whispered to give her sister a chance. "All right," Jessica replied, taking a deep breath. "I'll be here." 30 minutes later, Caroline knocked on her door. She wasn't wearing her usual designer clothes or makeup. She stood there in a hoodie and jeans, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. It was as if she wasn't trying to be anyone else for the first time. They sat across from each other, in an awkward silence that seemed to hang in the air. After a while, Caroline spoke. "I don't know where to begin," she said, her voice trembling. "Last night, watching you walk across that stage, I realized I've never really understood you. I always thought you were cold, that you just didn't care. But now, see it. You're not cold, Jessica. You're just tired. Tired of always having to prove yourself. Tired of doing it alone. For the first time in years, Caroline had truly seen her. Jessica sat quietly, absorbing her sister's words. It was a moment she had dreamed of, but now that it was happening, it didn't feel as satisfying as she had imagined. There was no magic fix, no sudden wave of forgiveness, but it felt different, felt like understanding, and that was enough. Jessica finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. You know, Caroline, I never wanted to disappear. I just wanted to be seen. And for so long I thought I had to compete with you to get that. But now I realize that I don't need to compete. I've learned to see myself. Caroline lowered her head, a wave of guilt washing over her. Did you ever wish I'd disappear? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jessica thought for a moment before answering. No, I never wished that. But I did wish for someone to acknowledge how hard I worked. For someone to say, I see you. For the first time, Caroline seemed to understand. Her eyes were red and her shoulders slumped. I'm jealous of you, Jessica. Jealous of your strength. I always thought you didn't care, but now I get it. You're just tired of trying to get anyone to notice. But you've done it. You've built this life for yourself, without needing anyone's approval. Jessica let out a small sigh. Maybe you're starting to understand, but it took me a long time to get here. I used to want an apology, used to want my parents to see me. But now I don't need that anymore. I've come far enough not to need anyone to tell me I'm enough. Caroline nodded, her expression filled with a mixture of remorse and understanding. So, what now? She asked. Are we still sisters? Jessica looked her sister straight in the eyes, a quiet strength in her voice. I don't know. Maybe it takes time to understand that being sisters isn't about sharing blood. It's about kindness, respect, and standing by each other, even when no one else does. In that moment, Jessica realized something important. She didn't need Caroline's apology to move forward. The journey had always been about her. But this conversation, this shift in understanding, gave Jessica something more than an apology. It gave her closure. She had finally let go of the need to be validated by others. As Caroline left the room, Jessica felt a sense of lightness she hadn't known before. She had let go of a weight that had been holding her down for years. And while the relationship with her family might never be the same, Jessica knew that she had found something even more valuable: the freedom to live on her own terms. Now, as Jessica moved forward with her career and life, she would face new challenges. But with this newfound peace, she was ready to tackle them head-on, knowing that she had already proven to herself that she was enough. With the weight of the past finally lifted off her shoulders, Jessica felt a new sense of freedom she had never known before. For so long, her life had been defined by the expectations of her family, by the silent comparisons, and by the constant struggle for approval. But now, she was stepping into a new chapter, one where she would no longer let anyone else dictate her worth. Jessica had always been determined, but now, with the knowledge that she didn't need anyone's validation, she felt like she could accomplish anything. She had spent years fighting for a place in a world that had seemed indifferent to her. But now the world didn't feel as heavy. She felt lighter, as if she could finally breathe freely. She moved to New York with a sense of purpose and confidence, knowing she had built her future with her own two hands. Her job at Evren & Co., a prestigious audit firm, was just the beginning. The city was filled with possibilities, and for the first time, Jessica wasn't afraid to take them on. She no longer needed to prove herself to her family or anyone else. Her accomplishments spoke for themselves. In her tiny apartment on the Upper West Side, with its brick wall view and minimal decor, Jessica found peace. It wasn't luxurious, but it was her space. A space she had earned through hard work, resilience, and most importantly, self-belief. She didn't need a glamorous apartment or flashy possessions to know that she had everything she needed. She had herself. Sometimes, the hardest part of building your future is realizing that the past doesn't have to define you. Many of us spend so much time trying to meet the expectations of others that we forget we have the power to rewrite our own stories. The true beauty of life comes when you learn to live for yourself, when you stop waiting for permission and start living on your own terms. Jessica's story is a reminder that we don't need others to tell us we're enough. We already are. And when we finally embrace that truth, we can build lives we're proud of. Lives that are shaped by our choices, not by the approval of others. As Jessica continued to grow in her career, she was also growing as a person. She had learned the most important lesson of all. Self-worth isn't something anyone else can give you. It's something you find within yourself, and once you do, you become unstoppable. But this wasn't the end of Jessica's journey. The next chapter would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and even more growth. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that, with or without the approval of those around her, she had the power to create the life she truly wanted. Thank you so much for sticking with me through Jessica's incredible journey. Her story reminds us all that true strength doesn't come from waiting for others to see us. It comes from believing in ourselves, even when the world doesn't. The lesson here is simple but powerful. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone but yourself. When you stop seeking validation from others, you free yourself to live the life you truly deserve. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. How did it make you feel? Have you experienced a moment where you had to choose yourself over seeking others' approval? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. We have plenty more stories coming your way. Thanks again for being here. You're not alone on this journey. Let's keep growing together. See you in the next video.